So I'm standing here with Alf Wills, who is the lead negotiator for South Africa in these talks. Alf, I'd like to begin by asking you what progress has been made here in Tianjin.
Well, Tianjin is actually, as you know, the preparatory process for Mexico. And in essence, we came into this week with 74 pages of text with lots of brackets. And the key here has been an effort to try and identify those issues which we can make progressive decisions on in Cancun. So to that extent, we have made some progress in Tianjin, working on the text, but we still don't have clarity on an overarching decision for both the Kyoto Protocol and the under the convention, the LCA, and in the absence of a very clear view of what is going to happen beyond Cancun, it's very difficult to outline what Cancun. You cherry pick out of the 74 pages which issues you can progress in Cancun. So that, I think, is the key challenge for the remaining day of negotiations.
There's been a lot of talk about the need for a balanced package, and kind of a couple of words that came up again and again in the plenary hall. What do you think this means?
Well, as I was trying to outline, a balanced package in terms of what? So in order to get a balanced package, you need to find out or need to agree on where we're going long term, which is the overarching decision, which says for South Africa, which says that we want a legally binding instrument or legally binding agreement in the long term under the convention, which includes targets for the USA. It refers to Annex B under the Kyoto Protocol for other developed countries. It's got a section dealing with mitigation action and MRV by developing countries, and that action is balanced with a focus on adaptation, because in the past we've never had any legal focus on adaptation, and both the mitigation and adaptation being supported with finance, technology and capacity building. So we do have an understanding of what the broad shape of the deal is, if you want. A Kyoto Protocol outcome and an outcome under the convention which captures both the US and developing countries in an equal legally binding form. So as a broad vision, I think there's a general kind of understanding of that, but to give detail to what that is, this is what we need in Cancun, is to have a framework decision of what is the framework that we're ending up with, 2 tracks. And once you understand what you want in the future, it's easier then to say, okay, we've got this part which is more mature than that part, so we can then pull out that part and make a substantive decision as a building block towards the future legally binding agreement. So that's just making that step change is the challenge for the next day and probably the beginning of Cancun.
We heard the US lead negotiator Jonathan Pershing say yesterday that he feels it's really important now that we start seeing some results from this process, because we can't keep justifying these huge meetups without some substantive progress. Where do you think the blockages are? What needs to shift? Which countries need to move, or which issues need to move?
Well, I think the issue is that we have to move on all the issues, and the disagreement with the US from many is that the US has chosen a few issues to move on, and others are saying, well, where's the guarantee that this other issue is going to progress in the longer term? And that's why I'm saying what we need is an overarching decision which puts all the issues, in order to give comfort to those that you can progress on some and not others in the short term.
Is there a danger that we slip back into the kind of Copenhagen all or nothing approach, which saw this kind of a lot of emphasis placed on a single conference and then ultimately a dramatic collapse? When we expect that again in South Africa in Joburg in a year's time, or are we not risking that anymore?
Well, okay. First of all, let me say that we don't, as South Africa, believe that we had a dramatic collapse in Copenhagen. In actual fact, what we got in Copenhagen was a political agreement around a particularly difficult issue, which is how to give expression in the agreement to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The problem that we have is that it didn't address the other key issue, is how to give expression or meaning to the principle of equity. So from a small island developing state perspective, it's inequitable for this low level of ambition because it's going to cause high global warming and the small island states will drown. So that's obviously an inequitable or unfair outcome. From a developed country from Europe perspective, it's unfair that the US is not legally bound as they are legally bound. So depending on from which perspective you look at, there's different facets of equity. And in Copenhagen, we did not focus on getting a package around giving meaning and expression to that. And that's the challenge that we face, is to take the political guidance provided in Copenhagen and give expression to the other key area of work, which is how to make it fair and put the whole together in the form of in our proposal to treaty solution, the Kyoto Protocol treaty and a treaty under the convention. So therein lies the challenge, and whether or not we'll be in a position to reach a treaty in Cancun seems to be difficult at this stage, given where the US is and where other countries on the developing country side are in terms of reaching agreement. So as Jonathan Pershing from the US actually says, it becomes important in that context to be able to demonstrate that in actual fact we're not sitting on our thumbs here. We are actually making some progress. And all I'm saying is that in order to make that progress, we need these overarching decisions so that we all agree that this is where we're going to.
There's been a lot of emphasis placed on the fact that these talks are being held in China for the first time. Do you think that's changed the tone, or has there been any kind of noticeable impact, or is it just another convention centre as far as you're concerned?
No, I mean, obviously it's a bit of a difference in that we've had COPs and COP MOPs in developing countries, but this is the first time that we've had an intersessional meeting in developing countries. I'm hopeful that China receives support from developed countries for the payment of this fantastic conference center, but I'm pretty sure that they put a lot of money in themselves. So I think that the signal is that both the developed and the developing countries are taking this issue serious and are prepared, if they have the capacity, to put their money where their mouth is.
I just want to finish by asking you a little bit about the domestic situation in South Africa, because the perception here seems to be that you have a relatively progressive attitude towards the talks and really trying to push things forward. But are you hobbled by kind of a reliance on coal at home? How is South Africa intending to reconcile its kind of international ambitions with this huge reliance on coal as far as your economy is concerned?
Well, with respect to coal in South Africa, our reliance on coal to some extent is a result of our history, the apartheid past, because in the 70s and the 80s, in the oil shock, most countries put measures in place to become more efficient in terms of their consumption of energy, and South Africa, being under threat of sanctions, made strategic decisions to use more coal in order to become self-sufficient. So we have the Sasol plant where we produce oil from coal at a very high emission cost. So in those years, and during apartheid years, yes, they may have achieved the objective of self-sufficiency, but it's left us with a legacy of high emissions that we now have to deal with now that the new democratic government is in place. So that's the kind of context that we come from. It's a unique circumstance.
But it's not simply a historic thing, though, is it? Because you're about to develop, one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the world. It seems like we can expect this reliance on coal to continue at least for the coming decades. Is this going to pose a problem as far as hitting, your own ambitious emissions targets, or is there a large program of renewable energy that we can expect soon?
Yes, well, let me touch on the coal. I mean, the reality that we have, that we face in South Africa, is that we need to reconcile two particular problems. The one issue is, what do we do to diversify our energy, in particular the electricity grid, away from a reliance on coal to a more reliance on renewable energies. And what we did is we did the work to scale up. What would it take in terms of investment, in terms of availability of wind turbines and solar panels, in terms of the availability and maturity of solar concentrated power technologies and so on. And we plotted what was possible in terms of making that transition. And we are intending to scale up over the next 10 years or so, massive scale up in renewable energies. However, even with that scale up, given the rate of growth and our rollout of access, because remember we're trying to create access for the rural poverty-stricken people to basic electricity services, modern electricity services. So we have a rollout program, and then when you plot the demand against the scale of your rollout of what's possible rolling out renewables, there's this gap, and the gap is about 15 gigawatts of energy. That's the gap between what you can provide with renewables and what's actually required. So what we did is we then said, okay, 15 gigawatts. We then rolled out and planned an intensive rollout of an energy efficiency program, which gives you about 6 gigawatts savings of the 15. So renewables plus the energy gives you a saving of 6, and you still got a gap of 9 gigawatts. But that's a short-term or relatively near-term demand, and that indicates that you have to fill that gap with something. Now, preferably, if we had water in South Africa, we would have done hydro. But unfortunately, South Africa is a water-scarce country. We don't have the potential to do hydro. So you're left with either oil or coal. We've got no geothermal resources. So that's where the two power plants come in, Medupi and Kusile. So we actually, the two power plants were then modeled into our business as usual trajectory, so that we build in the ultra supercritical technology. So we are using the best technology available in terms of coal, but it's a stopgap measure based on near-term demand, while we scale up the renewable program over the medium to long term.
Okay, I think that's an interesting note to leave it on, and I know you've got to rush off, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.